Hello, Philippines, and welcome to the World News Jam here on DZRJ Radio and RJTV Channel 224 on Sky Cable. My name is Eric Lecain. So happy you could join us this week. Whether it's on TV or the radio, Facebook, YouTube, even TikTok, we bring you what I think are the most interesting stories of the week. Things going on around the world. This week, the Philippines is in New York. There's a hurricane in Canada. Russia needs soldiers. Also news out of Iran and U.S. And is COVID over? All right here on the World News Jam on RJTV. So let's dive right into this week's pool of news. 60. That seems to be the number I keep hearing from people this week. I mean, before, it was a number I hated. People would say, "Are you 60?" And I would say, 60? What are you, crazy? But 2 weeks ago, people would say, "Do you think the peso will reach 60? 60 to the dollar?" And I would say, 60? Are you crazy? But as my age creeps closer and closer to 60, so does the number of pesos equal to the dollar. I mean, it's hard to believe, right? 60. I mean, it's never been 60, has it? However, currently, the Philippine peso is plowing its way to the ripe old age or value of 60. The scary part is that many economists are saying it won't stop there, that in the not so distant future, numbers like 64, 67 might pop up on the front page of the news. But what does this really mean to the average Filipino? So it's 50 one day, 60 the next. What does it really matter to me? I don't change money. Well, eventually, it's going to find its way to you in the form of higher prices. The Philippine economy is somewhat based on imported products and food, and the price of many of those imports is based on how much the dollar is worth. For instance, if you want to buy an iPhone, what Filipino doesn't want an iPhone? It's one of the most popular items imported into this country. And the iPhone, I don't know, let's say it costs $1,000. Well, it wasn't that long ago, a year, I think, where you paid 50,000 pesos for that phone. But as of today, you would pay 58,640. That's an increase of 8,640 pesos in just 1 year. Your iPhone went up a price of 17% in just a year. Now, I know that's an oversimplification, but you get the point. Products are the same price, but your money is now worth less. So you might say, well, I'll just buy Filipino-made products, no imported products. But it's hard because of the inflation of product pricing. I mean, to buy that egg at the store, it came from the Philippines. It had to be transported there somehow on a truck that was imported, using gas that was imported, and is fixed with imported parts. Now that Filipino egg is costing more. Now, as we know, the Philippines borrows money. They have to. In order for the country to pay their bills, they borrow money. But the U.S. keeps raising interest rates. In fact, they just raised interest rates this past week. They did this to try and curb inflation, but the effects made it more expensive to borrow money. The dollar is just more expensive. And this expensive dollar creates an uncertainty in the Philippine economy. The free fall of the peso was not something we knew was coming. I mean, there were some people like me saying it would surely go up some, but 60? We knew things were going to be bad because of COVID. We knew that shutting down a country like the Philippines for more than a year would have some kind of bad effect. But the problem is that the global inflation rate is basically putting an already drowning Philippines into even deeper water. The Philippines is importing more than it's exporting, and this is while prices keep continuing to rise worldwide. This increase will unfortunately drive up the demand for dollars, thus driving up the price of stuff. The higher prices, the more pesos the country will need to print too, and the more need for borrowing for infrastructure or to feed the growing population. There were a lot of pregnancies during COVID. But the one silver lining, it's Christmas. That means OFWs are going to begin that mass infusion of cash into the Philippine economy. Every Christmas there's always a big boost because the Philippines working overseas start sending in those U.S. dollars that they are earning. In fact, OFW remittance are on the track to grow in 2022 by 4%. Christmas is always good for the economy, and it will infuse a lot of cash, but will it make a difference in the value of the peso? Probably not. There needs to be more investment. Right now, the current president of the Philippines is in the U.S. trying to drum up some business for the country, making a plea to investors that the Philippines is a stable country and a great place to invest. And as we know, several key investors exited the country after the recent elections, so there are some holes to fill now. The president, large group of movers and shakers from the Philippines are there in New York this week for the UN General Assembly. Now, it's no secret that the U.S. and the Philippines have not been the best of friends during the last administration. No secret. But as I said here on the show years ago, the U.S. has time. If the last administration wants to pivot toward China and Russia, they will just wait until the next administration and see how that goes. Because, as we know, it really doesn't matter who's in charge in the Philippines. The U.S. needs that alliance. It just so happens where the Philippines sits on the map, it's just so very important to the U.S. government. It's always going to be in the best interest of the U.S. to try to be friends with whoever is running the country, because they want to have that influence over one of the most important spots in the Pacific. On the same token, if the Philippines does decide to play up to China, even to Russia, they know that the U.S. is still there, because they're not that easy to go around. So basically, as I see it, as do others, the two countries will always need each other. Like I was saying, now more than ever, the Philippines needs to lure in more investors into the country. The economy is in real trouble in the Philippines because here again, you can't shut down a country for basically 2 years and there not be some kind of long-term effects. So one good way the latest administration sees in getting out of this economic darkness is with U.S. investment. And don't forget, there's a war going on in the world right now. We really don't know how this is going to turn out. Every week, the story has a new twist. And what about the issue of Taiwan and China? That's not going away. The U.S. is very pivotal in both the current state in Russia and the Ukraine and the future state of China and Taiwan. So even though the Philippines needs the help of the U.S. in its quest to bring back the economy, it's critical to keep the U.S.-Philippine alliance in a positive state because we just don't know the future. Now, when President Biden met with President Marcos this week, he used the word critical multiple times. He used it in relation to that spot on the earth that remains so important to the U.S., the South China West Philippine Sea. And as the last administration seemed to have sort of given in to the Chinese occupation of the Philippine Sea, President Marcos seems to be maybe going down a different path, saying that it's the U.S. that is vital in maintaining the peace in our region, and this is much appreciated by the Philippines. You know, just before the meeting with Biden, Marcos had said that the alliance with the U.S. is possibly the most important policy there is in the Philippines now. I mean, just off the top of my head, even though President Marcos has had his own personal troubles with the U.S., he can't help but see that the big payoff that was supposed to happen with China didn't really go as planned. And now, doesn't it seem like the U.S. has just been standing by, waiting for the Philippines to come back? And now, is it a good time? Because not only does the Philippines need the U.S. economically, but like I said, the U.S. really wants and needs the Philippines as a friend and a partner in the South China Sea. During the meeting with Biden, there was some very touchy subjects that did get arisen: climate action, the crisis in Myanmar, human rights. Marcos still has a standing contempt order issued by the U.S. court over a human rights suit against the Marcoses. However, with Marcos being the president, he has diplomatic immunity. Fine. But aside from that, this week was very important for President Marcos, how he looks on the world stage, how he looks to the Filipino people. You know, there are many requests. There were very many requests for leaders to speak to the U.S. president. But out of all of them, he chose the Philippines to sit down and have a meeting with. I suspect that this could be because the Philippine relationship to the U.S. is just the most important to the U.S. right now. I think, as many do, that it might be the best time to strengthen that relationship between those two countries. Why? Well, there's a possibility of war in the region. The cliff diving act the peso is currently doing, the uncertainty of world inflation, and the rebuilding of the Philippines that has been pummeled by a pandemic. I believe anything gained by the Filipino president and his team of business people by this trip to New York should be seen as a success. And also, sometimes it feels good to come back to an old friend, and the Philippines and the U.S. are definitely old friends. Now, speaking of getting pummeled, this week Puerto Rico got slammed. Currently, Hurricane Fiona is making the rounds in the Atlantic, and Puerto Rico was right in the way. Now, if you remember when we talked about Hurricane Maria several years ago, they're two very different hurricanes. Maria hit as a Category 4 hurricane. 3,000 people died as a result of that hurricane. $100 billion in damage was done. Fiona just hit as a Category 1 storm. When it hit, the problem was that Puerto Rico still tried to rebuild from the first storm. This week, they got something like 3 feet of rain in a day as the storm passed over. And even though the wind was not as bad as before, the amount of water was devastating. National Guard was brought in to rescue people that were trapped. One woman was stuck in a tree for 7 hours waiting to be rescued. Something like 900,000 without power. When Maria hit, power went out in some places for a year. This is the same problem they're facing again. The other problem is drinking water. Almost the same amount of people are without fresh drinking water, and the temperature there is like 100 degrees, and with the humidity, it feels like 112. Now, this storm has inched its way up the East Coast, mostly far offshore, passed over Bermuda. But here's the thing. It's gone from a Category 1 to a Category 4. This means that winds are upwards of 130 miles an hour, creating huge waves off the coast of the U.S. as it moves northward to a place where you don't really see hurricanes, Canada. Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, Prince Edward Islands are getting hammered with something most have never even seen in their lives, a tropical hurricane. Mostly, what they are worried about is the rising water offshore. There are reports of 50-foot waves up there. Of course, there are fallen power lines, fallen trees with these 100-plus mile-an-hour winds. But here's something that's kind of weird. There's a large population of wild horses that just live there on Stable Island near Nova Scotia. 500 wild horses just roam the island's National Park Reserve. It's one of the most romantic places on Earth. However, it's not that big, just a narrow strip of dunes and grasslands. They were thought to have been brought there by sailors in the 18th century, just left there. They procreated, and it became the large population that they are today. People can visit there, but you can't interact with them or feed them. The island's been closed to tourists lately because of the impending weather. 4 officials have been stationed there to see how the horses kind of react to the storm because there's no shelter on the island, no natural protection, no place for the horses to hide. They are worried about the horses. They may go down when the tide comes in. They will go crazy and run straight into the ocean. So the park officials have a place with a generator to stay during the storm, watch the horses as the water begins to rise and rise. Speaking of rising water, Taiwan this week put out a tsunami warning after their 6.9 magnitude earthquake. Originally, it was registered 7.2 earthquake, but that was 6 miles down. But still, it was a big one. Buildings toppled, trains derailed. People were stuck all over the place during the roads all being blocked. As far as death or injury, it was not that bad, unlike 1999 with quake killed more than 2,000. But the main factor is the microchip factories did not fall. This, of course, scared the world when the news got out about the size of the earthquake. If people got stuck in the mountains, have to be rescued, that's Taiwan's problem. But if those chip factories get damaged, that's the world's problem. But the problem of inflation, issues of shipping, price hikes, something like a shutdown of the largest chip manufacturer, that would be devastating to the world. But as for now, we can take a big sigh of relief, as at least we don't have to deal with that. So there's a look at this week's storms and earthquakes, but still might not be as bad as the earth-moving storm that happened in Iran. All right, there's no rainstorm in Iran, but there is an earthquake of problems. This is DZRJ and RJTV. My name is Eric Lecain. Now, usually when we talk about Iran, it has something to do with nuclear weapons and who is threatening who in the Middle East. But today, it's something just as sinister, but it's in the plain sight of everybody. The laws of morality. Religion in Iran is everything. Nearly everything that is done there is done in some way, is influenced or subjugated by religion. The government is based around the interpretation of Sharia law, which is based on the teachings of the Quran and how it prescribes the religious and secular duties and sometimes the retributive penalties of lawbreaking. It's the Islamic legal system, or what certain religious leaders interpret as the legal system. Literally, it means clear, well-trodden path to water. Okay, but in reality, it comes down to what the government or the jurists tend to believe at that time. Actually, it all comes down to how literally they interpret the text at the moment they need to render a verdict. This decides also what the punishment will be for breaking the laws of which they have interpreted. A lot of the time, it's up to the judge as to what morality was broken, how far the punishment can go. For instance, how much you will need to repay, or whether you will be whipped with a cane, or you could lose a hand or a leg or your head, whether you will be stoned to death. They have safeguards put in place to keep mistakes from happening. However, it is well known that the application of these safeguards is rarely used. Sometimes it seems so strange and unfair to outsiders how the laws are divvied out in Iran, and the sometimes extreme differences of how sentences are given to women versus men. For instance, this week, 2 women were found guilty in an Iranian court for defending LGBTQ rights. They were charged with spreading corruption on earth. In other words, they were promoting, in the court's view, homosexuality, which in the Islamic Penal Code, it's there. They were found guilty of promoting homosexuality, also converting people to Christianity, having contacts with opposition media. Their sentence is death. One of the women was caught at the Turkish border trying to seek asylum. She was known for posting online information about sexual abuses against the LGBTQ community there, which is a real problem in Iran. But the big problem she has is that under Iranian law, homosexuality is illegal. And this can be met with death if you are found guilty. And somehow, she was trying to help young women, and somehow that was promoting homosexuality. She made a video before her arrest on the abuses in the lesbian community going through Iran. And for that, she's going to lose her head. But what about an even less of a crime? What if someone's hair comes out from under the hijab? You know, in Iran, women must always cover their hair and their body completely. The clothes must be loose-fitting so as not to show the shape of the body. So, in this recent case, a Kurdish woman, her hair came out from under her head covering. The morality police, as they are referred to, arrested her. She was actually in her brother's car on the way to visit the family. The police took her out of the car and put her in a van. Now, there are reports that during the arrest, the police banged her head against one of the vehicles, and in the van, they beat her with a baton. No way to be sure. I mean, the Iranian police are not going to admit this. So after her arrest, she was taken to a holding cell, then to a hospital, where she died of a heart attack. She was a 22-year-old, healthy young woman. Pictures have been floating around of her dead body laying in the hospital, which have led the Iranian government to shut down the internet. There's also a surveillance video showing her collapsing in a chair while talking to the police. In any case, she is dead. And for what crime? Accidentally showing her hair while in a car? But what happened next is what's so shocking. People were so angry, they started protesting. Yes, protesting in Iran, a place where speaking out against the government is a sure way to get your head removed. It was described as the Iranian George Floyd moment. Women are protesting in the street, burning their hijabs, saying that the laws of the country need to be changed. They set a police station on fire and burned vehicles. 36 people are believed to have been killed in these protests. The president of Iran said the death of the young girl will be investigated. However, said that the acts of chaos will not be tolerated. The National Judiciary has ordered that a tough line be taken with protesters because, according to them, most of them are foreign agents. This is something they always say when they see any kind of dissent. Now, the world is not taking too kindly to this woman being killed by what seems like the police. The issues of sanctions has come up again. The president of Iran came out and shot back with the common tactic by saying how the U.S. has many problems between its people and the U.S. police force, that many deaths occur in the U.S. and at the hand of police. It happens all the time there. And yet the U.S. does nothing to stop the killing. They continue to point out that why does the world judge them so harshly and not the U.S., who has a worse problem? Anyway, the government has sent in the military to shut down all protests, saying that they will confront the enemy, and that enemy being the protesters. But this protest seemed to be like no others we have seen recently. People are calling for the Islamic Republic itself to be removed. That's very strange to hear. Now, the U.S. is not sitting quietly by while all this happens. They are inflicting more sanctions on Iran on the top of the already debilitating sanctions, saying that the Iranian government routinely employs violence to suppress peaceful protests, while the cousin of the dead girl said that the regime is pressuring the family now to tell the world that the police's explanation of events is what really happened and not what all the eyewitnesses are saying. He said it's their plan to force this confession, and thus they believe that this will get rid of the protest. But the protests don't seem to be slowing down anytime soon. The government is insisting that the real enemy is the protesters, is trying to get the public to stay on their side, that it is unfortunate that this young girl died. However, people should stand in solidarity against the evildoers, those being the people that are protesting her death. Now, in the past, Iran has dealt with activists, vocal lawyer, human rights defenders, journalists by, shooting directly into crowds, using tear gas, water cannons, violently beating protesters. But this is not like past protests. This is a big protest. Many, many people are involved, and they don't seem to mind risking their lives in order to be heard. This is not the usual Iran. This is something new there. And here's the thing. Many of these protesters are women. So with the world watching, the government has to make some hard decisions on how they're going to handle this one. Now, they may not mind seeing dead people in the street. They don't mind shooting protesters right there on the spot. But the world is looking at them very closely now. And unless they want another round of sanctions, it's important to really not show who they really are. This is Lecain here on the World News Jam on DZRJ and RJTV. Well, right now, the travel agency business in Russia is booming. Why? Because if you're a man below the age of 60 and you're not crippled and you're not working in a company that builds military equipment, you very well may be recruited into the Russia-Ukrainian war. Putin kind of promised before that the public would not need to be involved in this war of his. Just support it, don't say anything bad about him, and you won't need to be near it. Well, that turned out to be not exactly true, because this week President Putin made an announcement that Russia will be recruiting 300,000 men to go to the Ukraine to fight. He desperately needs these men to go to the Ukraine to hold on to his dwindling holdings in the Ukraine right there on the eastern border. Currently, there just aren't enough soldiers to stay in the cities while what's left of the military tries to take on other places. And when the Russian military gets this thin, well, that's when the Ukrainians sneak in and take it back. Now, Putin thinks this new use of forcible recruitment is going to fix the problem. But of course, it's not a secret. And the Ukrainian military knows that this could take at least a month to pull together and deploy. So they have said that during that time, they will be taking back as much land as possible. The Ukrainian president said that he believes this month is enough time to regain most of the territories that Russia currently holds. In the meantime, if you're watching Russia TV, there was a massive pro-war rally in Russia with 50,000 people in attendance, according to them. This included men proud to be recruited to the fight for the mother country and all the people supporting the referendum votes of the Ukraine territories that are waiting for the chance to be part of the country of Russia. But when you look a little closer, just outside the rally, you will see a mass exodus at the border of Finland. People trying to get out of Russia. And at the border of Kazakhstan, where there's a line of cars several miles long with people trying to escape the country. Kazakhstan, by the way, is one of those places that Russians can currently go without a visa. So, why are many trying to flee from Russia? To avoid being drafted into the war. Like I've said before, sometimes what you see on Russian TV is not really what's happening in Russia. Sometimes they are quite different. Now, as we've said before, many of those places in the Ukraine that Russia is occupying, they are holding referendum elections in order to decide if they will choose to join the Russian Federation or stay in the Ukraine. It's very much what they did in Crimea when they overthrew that part of the Ukraine years ago. Russia thinks that once the Russian-occupied Ukrainian city votes to join with them, then the annexation will be a little more accepted by them and maybe even the world. However, that's not really working out very well, is it? As every time they do one of these sham referendums, the Ukrainians have been taking back the cities that just joined with Russia. And also, these elections are not actually free and fair. Most of the world does not take them seriously. They force the vote on people, and it's very dangerous to try and resist. Actually, the officials go door to door to get people to vote. And of course, you will need to vote to join the Russian Federation. Actually, in most cases, an armed soldier asks you who you want to vote for, and then he marks your ballot and then puts it in the box for you. And, you don't actually get to see it. Most people don't even know who or what they're voting for. The Ukrainian government is telling people that if you see a group of strangers coming toward your house, you need to turn out the lights and lock all the doors and pretend you're not at home. Probably half the people have already fled the region, so many times they will just think that you've left. One of the ideas the Russians have to get around this problem of too few voters, they're making people as young as 13 to vote in these elections, to at least get some bit of semblance of a decent number of votes. And the worst part is that the Russians are trying to force locals to fight for them, for Russia. Now, forcing Ukraine to fight against Ukraine is, of course, against the Geneva Convention. Not that anyone is paying attention to that anymore. But the problem Putin is currently facing now is not so much the Ukrainians, but the people back in Russia. As we said last week, protests, which are illegal in Russia, are spawning all around the country. And protests are not only people marching in the streets, but many are young men just simply fleeing the country to avoid the war. Train stations are jam-packed. Traffic on roads leading out of the country are packed, and there are no airline seats to be had, as all are filled with young men of fighting age trying to sneak out of the country. Just to put it in perspective, a flight to Kazakhstan, usually around $300 this week, you can't find a ticket under $8,000. Now, Putin claims that he will only be going after young men with military experience. But no one is buying that. The trust in Putin has pretty much gone out the window. There are already stories of men with zero military experience getting papers to report to duty, and many people protesting the draft in the streets are being picked up by the police and ironically enlisted into the military and are sent straight to the Ukrainian border. But even there, when you get there, they give you a crash course in basic military combat, and here's your gun. Okay, now go fight. There are videos of people being carried away from protests. Then a week later, their families getting a message from their loved ones who are now in the Ukraine. One student got a letter to report to duty, but thought, wait, I'm a student. There must be a mistake. So he went to the military base to clear it up. When he got there, they said, there's no mistake. You'll be deployed right now. He didn't even get a chance to say goodbye to his mother. Now, with Putin being backed further and further into a corner, people are starting to worry that he will soon get pushed to the edge in which there will have to be a decision before him as to whether he will give up on the war, which means most likely he will be removed from power and executed for war crimes, or he will have no choice but to add nuclear weapons to his plans to take the Ukraine. The Biden administration has openly warned Putin against doing this and has said that if he goes that route, it will mean nothing less than the end of his country. Now, some don't think Putin would be that dumb or crazy enough to use nukes on civilians. However, he does keep threatening that he will use nuclear weapons, and those threats have to be taken seriously, which is why currently the U.S. is preparing for a possible nuclear conflict. Now, back in Russia, as we said last week, the word is out that Putin has not been telling the truth to his people. Some politicians have been taking a huge risk by signing a petition to forcibly remove Putin from office. And there have been protests all around Russia in the past few weeks. Videos are coming out of people yelling, "No mobilization." That's the chant of people against the drafting of young men to go fight in a war that many are starting to question. Over 1,300 were arrested in a single day in Russia for protesting as police took people in custody in 38 cities across Russia. And once you are arrested, you are given a choice. Go to the Ukraine and fight in a war that you are currently protesting, or spend 15 years in a Russian prison. And it's not just men. In Siberia, some women are taking a huge risk by holding up signs that say, "Our husbands, fathers, and brothers do not want to kill other husbands, fathers, and brothers." But women are not. Police are stepping up their crackdown on protesters, even in the remote cities. And new laws have been enacted recently constraining free speech even more than it was before. Now, the EU has put a whole new round of sanctions at Russia's doorstep, but they announced recently something, not what the Russian government wanted to hear. Right now, many Russians want to leave the country. It's obvious. The EU has said that if any Russian wants to come and live in the EU, they have a procedure which you can do in order to stay. This is good news for the people of Russia, but bad news for Russia. The population is already shrinking in Russia. And as the sanctions begin to take effect, and as the war drags on, more and more Russians are going to go on a vacation, never to return. Putin will be the president of a country that almost no other country will do business with, that no one wants to fight for, and a population that wants to move to anywhere else. Like I said before, the more this war drags on, the worse position it will put Putin in. Soon he will have to make a choice. Honestly, I don't see a way for him to win this war with the current path he's taking. He will either, number one, walk away, which means almost certainly death to him or imprisonment. Or number two, use something we thought that we would never see in this modern world, a nuclear weapon being used against humans. Currently, I think things would be a whole lot easier if he or someone close to him would just choose number one. This is Lecain here in the peaceful Philippines on DCRJ and RJ TV. We're talking about interesting stories going on around the world. Well, good old Donald Trump has got himself back in the news. Well, actually, he never really left the news. So here's a continuation of the U.S. political scene. As we already know from previous World News Jam shows, Trump is in some pretty hot water for leaving the White House with a pile of classified documents. Seems when he left the White House, he took home some things that didn't belong to him, such as some classified documents, some super classified documents, some super duper classified documents. Now, he claimed he returned them. However, even though he returned some of them, he did not return all or a lot of them. And some of the ones he kept turned out to be some of the most secret stuff that the U.S. keeps. Things like nuclear secrets of other countries and possible list of undercover agents in other countries, documents that could be very valuable to other countries. Now, Trump claimed many reasons for having all these documents. However, the one we are focused on today is that he had the power to unclassify them and therefore had every right to take them. Now, last time we talked about this, Trump had just gotten one of his own picked judges to make a somewhat, according to legal experts, ridiculous ruling that a special master should be put in place to see what is really classified or not and what falls under attorney-client privilege. But the weird thing was that she said that all investigations must stop while this is under review. So it was fairly obvious that the DOJ was going to appeal that, and they did. So the appeals court in the 11th district, that was also made up of mostly judges picked by Donald Trump, made their decision this week. But surprisingly, or not, it did not go Trump's way at all. In fact, it went the opposite. The appeals court said, in a complete about-face of the last judge, that the DOJ can continue with its criminal probe into the fact that Donald Trump had illegally kept U.S. classified documents in his country club home. It was an example of, even though these were Trump-appointed judges, which Trump refers to as my judges, there comes a point where they have to go by the law. The DOJ gave Trump multiple chances to come clean on this whole problem, and he just continually jerked them around. The court stated that it doesn't understand why Trump would need to have classified documents, and that so far there is no evidence that any of the documents were ever declassified. They pointed out that when the special master had asked, "What is your evidence that Trump did indeed declassify these documents?" and the lawyers of Trump responded, well, And even if they were declassified, Trump was still not even supposed to have them. So the DOJ can now continue its criminal investigation. So even Trump's lawyers won't say that Trump actually declassified anything. Trump is still saying he declassified everything. Trump has said from the start that the president has the ability to declassify anything he wants, and that the procedure for doing it is whatever he says it is. So all he has to do is say they are declassified, and they are. Even if he doesn't tell the Department of Defense or the National Archives. Now, this week on TV, in front of Sean Hannity of Fox News, the president said that all he has to really do is just think it. Just think declassified, and the documents are declassified. Now, that is a power that so far no one has ever heard of in a U.S. president. The power to declassify secret documents with just the power of his mind. But Trump did not stop there. He went on to speculate why he believes the FBI, who he claims now is very corrupt, raided his home in the first place. They were possibly looking for the deleted emails of Hillary Clinton, which to this day we don't even know if they ever even existed. Oh, and the possibility the FBI was looking into the fact that Obama spied on his campaign, which is another claim that he made that has never been able to be proven. Even Sean Hannity had to interrupt the ex-president to say, whoa, But you're not saying you have Hillary Clinton's emails, are you? I mean, it was some crazy stuff. That interview train went off the rails and down the side of a mountain. I mean, where did any of that come from? Hillary Clinton deleted emails, which, in case you don't remember, comes back from a story in 2015 in which Hillary Clinton had a private email server in her house, which was thought to be used for government emails. However, it was investigated up and down and back and forth, and she was questioned in front of Congress under oath, and it was deemed just a mistake, no wrongdoing. By the way, she was not the president. And this and that are very different things than now. But this crazy interview has been replayed so many times on the TV. Even Republicans go, oh no, what the hell is he saying now? So anyway, on another problem, the probe into the January 6th riot on the Capitol is back in the news. Remember before, when one of the Supreme Court justices was the lone judge to say that the Congressional Committee should not have access to Trump's diaries, his visitor logs, speech drafts, handwritten notes, anything relating to the January 6th attack. He was the only one. Even the so-called Trump judges would not vote against seeing those documents. Well, it turned out that the judge's wife was part of the attempt to overthrow the election by any means possible. She lobbied in states to have them throw out electors and suggested to bring in the army just to take back the White House. Now, she holds no office. She has no legal standing, yet retains great power in the conservative movement because she's married to a Supreme Court justice. Now, in looking back, the Supreme Court is making a decision on whether to investigate whether someone is attempting to overthrow the election, and someone trying to overthrow the election is the wife of the only justice to say that we should not investigate this. Things that make you go, So next week, the January 6th committee is going to question her, look into her role in the secret planning to overthrow the U.S. election, and was she involved in the violent part of the plot? And also whether her husband made a decision on the bench to protect her. But besides that, and in the middle of all these investigations into the ex-president, all this stuff that's currently going on, a bombshell exploded this week. Really had nothing to do with the ex-president Donald Trump, but had everything to do with the private citizen Donald Trump. It all started a while ago when Trump's fix-it man, Michael Cohen, remember him? He pleaded guilty in a court for a host of illegal things he did relating to and not to Trump. But during all that pleading out and speaking out in the court, he said something very interesting. He said that when Trump was a real estate developer, he used to inflate his assets when he needed a loan, and then he would deflate his assets when he needed to pay taxes. Now, at the time, many people were like, we want to hear about the porn star that Trump paid off to keep quiet, that she spanked him with a rolled up Forbes magazine before having sex with him in the golf club while his wife was pregnant. So while we were all focused on that, someone else was listening very closely to that stuff about inflated assets. That would be the New York Attorney General, who was like, that's a crime. So we started to investigate. However, when Trump got wind of this, that guy was quickly shown the door. However, that was then, and this is now. And the new AG from New York now this week slapped Trump with a massive lawsuit to the tune of $250 million, as well as stopping him from doing business in New York anymore. Now, as we know, Trump's own CFO was just recently sentenced to jail time. However, just before going to jail, he was able to make a deal to give pertinent information about the Trump business. So here we are. Trump is charged with violating both civil and criminal state laws related to fraud and issuing false financial statements and false business records. The AG is saying that between 2011 and 2021, Trump and his children engaged in numerous acts of fraud and misrepresentation in order to unjustly enrich themselves. The claim is that Trump himself approved these documents, that Trump made more than 200 false and misleading valuations of assets. And for all these violations, Trump should have to pay $250 million and will be barred from ever engaging in any commercial real estate acquisitions for 5 years. And he nor his children can ever serve as officers or directors in any capacity in New York again. Now, the AG gave a speech this week laying out the government's case against Trump. She said, claiming that you have money that you do not have does not amount to the art of the deal. It's the art of the steal. That alludes to Trump's book, The Art of the Deal, which actually turns out was written by a ghostwriter anyway. Now, the AG has receipts from Trump's assets that show how much he claimed they were worth in order to secure bank loans that he desperately needed at that time. Now, okay, who hasn't inflated the value of something little to get a loan? However, Trump set the value of several of his rent-stabilized apartments at $49.5 million. However, the combined value of all of the apartments was somewhere around $750,000. It'd be one thing to add on a few dollars, but that would be a 65 times the value asset. Just another example, the value he valued the value of his current house in Florida is $75 million, which is based on zonal value in that area, surrounding properties. However, when securing a loan, Trump valued his property at, get this, $739 million. There is no property anywhere in that part of the U.S. worth anywhere near that. So Trump, of course, spoke out saying that this is just another witch hunt by a racist attorney general. Now, I'm not sure how the attorney general is racist. She's a black woman, so not sure where that comes from. However, he did say that instead of fighting murder and violent crime, she's just coming after him. Also, that this is somehow political and the AG has bad poll numbers. Anyway, as the suit progresses, the AG said that it may open the doors to federal crimes involving the Internal Revenue Service, which has jail attached to it. So, right at this point, the only big fish to go to jail in the company of Trump is the CFO and, of course, his lawyer from before, Michael Cohen. The key elements that we don't know yet is who else from the Trump organization has been spilling the beans. And the big question is, when the spotlight is put on Trump, will he throw one of his kids under the bus to save himself? I know, Simon, it gets hard to keep all the cases against Trump straight. Which cases going for what? Which attorney general is going after Trump and what state? Or is it federal? Is this case from when he was the president or when he was not the president? But we will be here following each one, whether you like it or not. Like I have said, Trump is not back in the news. It seems he will never leave the news. And this is Eric Lecain here on the World News Jam on DCRJ and RJ TV. We're talking about stories going on around the world. Is the pandemic over? Well, that's what the U.S. president says. In a speech last week, he raised many eyebrows when Biden declared an official end to the pandemic. Really? Do you think it's over? Does it feel like it's over? Well, in the Philippines, the answer is no. It doesn't really feel like it's over at all. I still have to wear a mask in the mall. I still got to stick my hand on that temperature thing. I had to get into a concert over at the CCP and I had to take a COVID test outside on the patio. But I was also in the U.S. recently and I got to say, it kind of does feel a little bit like it's over there. However, in the U.S., there's still 400 people dying every day of COVID. The Philippines is nowhere near that. So even though most of us are taking our fourth booster shot, I'm still not convinced that this thing is done. Many are saying that the president's announcement might be a bit premature and even counterproductive. But many of us are fairly back to our normal lives. Most I know, not so worried anymore to get the disease. I mean, you've been vaccinated, right? Which, of course, we know does not mean you're not going to get the virus. It just means that your chances of getting it bad are greatly lessened. But that's really in the now. Honestly, we really have no idea what tomorrow will bring, except for the fact that we, as the human race, are more vulnerable than we ever imagined. We all thought the thing that was going to kill us was going to be war or an asteroid or maybe an alien attack was going to kill millions and bring the world to a standstill. Not some kind of super cold. But here we are living in the age where we got to experience the near largest pandemic to ever face Homo sapiens. And whether some of us think it's done, in the back of every medical scientist's mind is the knowledge that somewhere in the world right now, in some human or bat or monkey, there's a new virus trying to find its way out. It's mutating and building its muscles, holding on for the day that it can finally mix in with the spit in the host's mouth and get blown out through a cough to freedom to roam to the next person and start the chain reaction of life, of a virus. But we can't just focus on the sickness and the death of a single cell organism and what it can bring. We have to look at the bigger picture. We all have had shots now, but how much better off are we? If you remember, the pandemic scored high numbers on the killing of economies too. The part of the pandemic that is clearly not over. How do you think the price of gas got so high? Do you think without the pandemic, it would have gone to the level it has? And the answer would be no. For a year, no one drove a car. I went literally an entire year never going to the gas station. The oil companies need to recoup that loss, and once they have, we've gotten used to the higher prices. Do you think that they will drop them as fast as they raise them? The answer still is no. And this pandemic, well, it's still going to be going around for a while. And what about working? We as a world learned that we can work at home. We can sit on our couch in shorts with Oprah on the TV, do our work at the same time. This has changed many of us. In fact, we can order everything we need right from the couch. Food, socks, dog toys, anything. We never have to leave our house. But now, all of a sudden, we got to go back to what? But the problem many of us have is getting our kids back to school. I mean, we used to have a good 6 to 8 hour break from your kids, but many have had them for 24 hours, 7 days a week through this pandemic. Also, honestly, the whole school thing is still all screwed up. Whether you're in the Philippines or in the U.S., what grade are you in now? And the poor kids in that school had less time online than the rich kids. Those kids, didn't have a computer at home. So what's their situation now? Do they have to repeat a grade that they missed? What's it going to be like for kids to be around other kids after being alone for so long with their best friend, the iPad? I wonder how that's going to be. The other problem is that many countries are heading into the flu months. Many experts are predicting that the number of COVID cases will rise again, just because it will. The pandemic may be over, but COVID is still here. It never went anywhere. We just came up with a way to make sure that we feel better about it. I'm not so sure this virus will really be over anytime soon. Honestly, every time I hear someone cough, I immediately go, oh, wow, that dude's got COVID. Every time I go to shake someone's hand, there's still that awkward pause where you're not sure whether you should fist bump or shake. If I walk outside without a mask, is everyone going to stare at me? Oh, look, he's not wearing a mask. Am I proud about that or am I ashamed? I guess that depends on what country you're in, doesn't it? In the meantime, I guess you can say the pandemic is over if it makes you feel better. But in reality, I'm not sure we will ever be able to go back to the way it was. This is Eric Lecain here on the World News Jam on DZRJ and RJTV. Thank you so much for spending your evening with us, listening to some of what we think are the most interesting stories going on around the world. Please join us again next week when we will talk again about what's going on in the world during the week. And until then, this is Eric Lecain here on the World News Jam on DZRJ and RJTV. Everybody stay safe out there, and we will see you next week.